The February wind off Lake Michigan didn't just blow through Chicago, it carved through the city like a surgeon's scalpel, precise and merciless, cold enough to freeze breath into crystalline clouds before it could fully leave the lungs. The temperature had plummeted to 12 degrees Fahrenheit, but the wind chill pushed it down to -5, the kind of brutal cold that could kill exposed skin in minutes and turn breathing into a sharp, painful experience. Theron Coulter stood beneath the weathered brass awning of the Cadence Opera House, the metal fixtures above him creaking against their moorings as wind tested every bolt and weld. He watched the after-performance crowd disperse into the Arctic night with practiced urgency, people who understood that lingering meant danger, that this weather didn't negotiate or show mercy. Diamond earrings caught and fractured the amber glow of ornate street lamps as wealthy patrons hurried toward waiting town cars and Mercedes sedans idling at the curb, exhaust creating small clouds that dissipated instantly in the savage wind. Their fur coats and tailored wool served as insulation against both the brutal weather and the harsher reality that existed beyond their privileged lives. Laughter echoed down the sidewalk, the carefree sound of people who'd never had to count the cost of safety, who'd never learned that protection was privilege rather than birthright. Theron had attended the performance not for culture or entertainment, but for business, the cold, calculated kind that built empires in shadows. The Opera House's board president, Gerald Hutchins, owed him money. Not the kind of debt that could be discharged through bankruptcy or negotiated down through clever accounting, but the kind that required payment in either cash or favors that could be called upon when circumstances demanded. The meeting had concluded during intermission in a private box, sealing understanding between two men who recognized that some obligations couldn't be escaped through legal maneuvering or prayer. Hutchins would vote a certain way on an upcoming zoning decision. Theron would consider the debt satisfied. Both men would maintain the polite fiction that their relationship was social rather than transactional. The performance itself had been Puccini, Tosca, with its themes of love and betrayal, sacrifice and violence. The soprano's final aria, her voice soaring through the opera house with crystalline clarity, had stirred something Theron had thought successfully buried. A memory of his mother's voice singing him to sleep in Czech, in a language he'd since deliberately forgotten, before everything changed, before the world taught him that safety was illusion and power was the only currency that truly mattered. The crowd thinned with remarkable speed. Opera patrons didn't linger in 20-degree weather making small talk about vocal technique and staging choices. They fled toward heated vehicles and late dinners at restaurants where reservations were made months in advance. Within minutes, the sidewalk had emptied except for stragglers fumbling with car keys and staff members securing the building for the night. The valets had dispersed, the last luxury vehicles pulling away with the smooth near silence of German engineering. The night was settling into that particular quality of urban emptiness that comes when even a city as large as Chicago seems briefly abandoned. That's when he saw her. She emerged from the alley running along the opera house's eastern wall, moving with careful, measured steps. Someone navigating invisible obstacles. Someone who'd learned that sudden movements attracted attention and attention invited danger. Her winter coat was several sizes too large, men's extra large at minimum, and it hung on her slender frame like a tent, the hem dragging against salt-stained concrete with each step. The coat itself was distinctive, heavy wool, dark navy, with mismatched buttons suggesting repairs made with whatever materials were available. It had seen better years, the kind of garment purchased from thrift stores, where warmth mattered infinitely more than fit or fashion. Her face was partially obscured by a knitted scarf wrapped multiple times around her neck and lower face, handmade, with uneven stitching. But her eyes were fully visible, wide, dark, and filled with the particular species of fear that came from being hunted over extended time, from knowing that pursuers were closing distance with methodical inevitability. She scanned the street with hypervigilance, her head turning in quick, sharp movements that suggested her nervous system was operating on pure adrenaline. Her movements had the jerky quality of someone pushing past their body's limits through sheer determination. And she was looking directly at him, not past him toward the street beyond, not vaguely in his direction, but directly, deliberately at Theron Coulter, as if she'd been searching for someone specific and had just found exactly what she needed. She took 3 more steps in his direction, each one requiring visible effort, her legs trembling with exhaustion and possibly hypothermia. Then her knees simply gave out. The collapse happened in distinct stages that Theron's trained eye caught with clarity. First, her knees buckled, then her hands shot out reflexively, reaching for support that didn't exist. Finally, her entire body tilted forward as gravity claimed victory. Theron moved without conscious thought. His body simply reacted. He closed the 15-foot distance in 4 long strides, his expensive Italian shoes finding purchase on ice that would have sent less physically confident men sprawling. He caught her before she hit the concrete, his arms wrapping around her shoulders as momentum drove them both backward. His spine impacted against the opera house's limestone facade with enough force to drive air from his lungs, but the collision prevented her skull from cracking against concrete. Her weight settled against his chest, surprisingly light. Theron registered her frame as dangerously underweight, felt her ribs pressing against his torso with almost no cushioning tissue. She was starving, not just hungry, but actually starving, her body consuming its own muscle mass, and that's when he felt it. Something was moving beneath the heavy wool of her coat. Not fabric shifting with breathing, but deliberate, controlled motion. Something alive, something warm, something small enough to be hidden but substantial enough that its movement was unmistakable. Something was breathing independently of the woman in his arms. Theron's hand, which had instinctively steadied her shoulder, froze. Every nerve focused with laser intensity on the sensation pressing against his torso through layers of fabric. The coat's excessive size wasn't about warmth. It was concealment. The way she held herself wasn't just exhaustion. It was protective posture. The fear in her eyes wasn't just personal. It was terror of someone responsible for protecting something infinitely precious. Whatever was hidden beneath that coat was child-sized, warm with body heat, and attempting to remain motionless despite terrifying circumstances. "Please." Her voice emerged barely above a whisper, cracked from cold and dehydration. Each syllable cost visible effort. Her lips were chapped and bleeding, evidence of hours exposed to brutal weather. "Please, they'll find us if we stay here. They have people everywhere. They're looking right now. We can't stop moving, can't stay anywhere too long, can't—" Her words dissolved into rapid, shallow breathing, hyperventilation preceding panic attack or complete collapse. "Us." The pronoun registered like a gunshot, changing everything. She wasn't running alone. She wasn't protecting only herself. Whatever hid beneath that coat was part of an us that elevated stakes beyond self-preservation into something far more complicated and infinitely more dangerous. Theron's mind calculated variables with the speed that had kept him alive through countless dangerous situations. The alley she'd emerged from led to service entrances and employee parking, spaces typically empty after performances. She hadn't been attending the opera. She'd been hiding near it, using the crowd as temporary camouflage. The oversized coat wasn't just warmth, it was concealment for cargo she couldn't carry any other way. For precious weight she couldn't set down because doing so would mean separation, vulnerability, exposure. "Who's looking for you?" His voice was low, barely audible above the wind, but it carried the weight of someone who'd spent his adult life making people answer questions. The tone wasn't threatening. Not yet. But it contained certainty. Her eyes darted past him, scanning with practiced paranoia. Her surveillance was comprehensive despite obvious exhaustion, behavior of someone who'd survived precisely because they never stopped being vigilant. "I can't. Not here. Not in the open where anyone might see us, might recognize us, and might report our location." Her words tumbled out in rapid bursts. "They have people everywhere. Police, security, private contractors, informants. If they see us talking, if they recognize me or notice anything unusual, I just need... I thought if I could get somewhere with people, somewhere public where witnesses..." She was fading visibly, mentally reaching the limit of how long fear and adrenaline could sustain a body running on empty reserves. Theron recognized the signs, the trembling beyond cold, the unfocused gaze preceding unconsciousness, the shallow, rapid breathing as her body struggled to maintain oxygen delivery. She had minutes before collapse became irreversible without medical intervention. He made his decision with cold calculation, weighing risks against potential benefits. But underneath that rational assessment ran a deeper current. The part of him that remembered being 8 years old and terrified. The part that had promised himself that if he ever achieved power, he'd use it to ensure others didn't suffer the hell he'd endured. "My car." He gestured toward the black Mercedes S-Class idling at the curb. "You need medical attention. You need warmth. You need safety long enough to explain what you're running from." "No hospitals." Her hand shot out with surprising speed, gripping his forearm with fingers that dug into expensive fabric. "No police, no official records of any kind, no reports or forms or anything that enters databases. Please, you have to understand. They'll find us through the system. They have access to everything. Hospital admissions, police reports, emergency services, they monitor it all. If my name or description enters any database, we're dead within hours." They, them. Pronouns carrying weight she wasn't explaining, implications she couldn't elaborate. Theron understood immediately. She was running from something organized, something with substantial resources, and something that made official channels more dangerous than trusting a stranger. His driver, Gregor Petrov, approached with practiced silence. 15 years together meant Gregor knew when situations required observation rather than questions. His expression remained professionally neutral, his employer holding a half-conscious woman whose coat seemed oddly bulky, whose eyes radiated genuine fear. Gregor had been with Theron since the early days, had helped build the organization from street-level operation to sophisticated enterprise. He'd seen things that would haunt most men, but he'd learned to recognize genuine terror versus performance, actual victim versus manipulator. What he saw in this woman's eyes was genuine. "The safe house on Wabash," Theron instructed. "Call ahead. Have Dr. Rivas meet us there within 30 minutes. Sooner, if possible. Tell him to bring supplies for treating exposure, dehydration, malnutrition, possible hypothermia, and..." He paused, his hand still feeling that small movement beneath wool. "Tell him to bring supplies for treating a family. Everything he might need for both adult and child patients. Full range of ages." The word family seemed to land with particular weight. The woman's eyes, which had started closing, opened fully. She looked at him with an expression of surprise mixed with something that might have been hope or terror at being discovered. "You know," she whispered. Not a question, but a statement of fact. "I know you're hiding something under that coat." Theron's tone remained neutral. "And I know that whatever it is, you're willing to die protecting it. You've been running in weather that kills people, risking exposure and hypothermia, going without food and sleep, all to keep that secret safe. That willingness tells me everything I need to know about whether it deserves protection. Now get in the car before we both freeze to death having this conversation." Gregor opened the Mercedes rear door, revealing leather interior and heated seats. Warm air flowed out, carrying the scent of expensive leather and subtle cologne, mundane details that somehow emphasized the surreal nature of the moment. The woman hesitated, survival instincts warring with need. Every self-preservation lesson screamed that getting into a stranger's vehicle violated fundamental rules, that strangers offering help were predators in disguise, that cars were mobile prisons, but staying guaranteed capture. The mathematics of survival sometimes meant choosing between two terrible options. "I don't know you," she said, voice cracking, breaking not from cold, but from the weight of a decision that might determine whether she and her hidden cargo lived or died. "No," Theron agreed. "But you looked at me specifically when you came out of that alley. You walked toward me instead of approaching anyone else. You made a choice before you even collapsed. So I'll ask directly, why me? What did you see that made you think I was worth the risk?" She studied his face in dim light, searching for something she couldn't articulate but needed to recognize. Her eyes traced the hard lines of his features, high cheekbones, strong jaw, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the expensive coat, the custom tailoring, the way he held himself with confidence. "You look like someone who understood what it means to be afraid," she said finally, each word chosen carefully. "Not someone who causes fear for entertainment, but someone who remembers it from personal experience, someone who survived it and came out changed, someone who might understand why a person would make frantic choices when no good options exist and time is running out." She paused, swaying. "And I saw you at the club before, weeks ago. You came in for meetings, the managers, the security. Everyone was afraid of you. Real fear, genuine terror, the kind you can't fake." I thought, maybe anyone who scared people that dangerous might be dangerous enough to protect us from them. The observation was so precise, so impossibly accurate, that Theron felt something crack in his armor. She'd seen past the expensive suit and reputation, straight through to the frightened 8-year-old boy from Prague, who still lived in his consciousness, who still remembered what it felt like to be helpless. "Get in the car," he said quietly, his voice carrying unexpected gentleness. "Whatever you're running from, they won't find you tonight. You have my word, and I don't give my word lightly." She nodded once, a decision made despite every rational reason for hesitation, and slid carefully into the leather seat, moving with exaggerated caution to avoid jostling whatever she protected. As she settled, adjusting the bulky fabric around her torso with trembling hands, Theron caught a clear glimpse of small fingers, child-sized, impossibly tiny, gripping the wool from inside, holding on with strength born of terror. His jaw tightened. Children changed everything. Children made unconscionable crimes completely unforgivable. Children made men like him remember exactly why walls had seemed necessary, because feeling too much, caring too deeply, meant being vulnerable to paralyzing pain. He slid in beside her, and Gregor closed the door with a soft click that sounded like a vault ceiling. The Mercedes pulled away, leaving the opera house behind, carrying 3 people, 2 visible, 1 hidden, into a night that would irrevocably change all their lives. The woman leaned against the door, her reflection ghost-like in the window as Chicago's lights streamed past. Her hands remained protective around the coat, around the precious cargo she'd risked everything to protect, around the small life that represented both her purpose for running and the reason she couldn't afford to fail. She didn't speak during the 20-minute drive, and Theron didn't press. Questions could wait until she had food, warmth, and the basic security of walls between her and whatever demons hunted her. Time enough for truth once immediate survival was assured. But one thing had already solidified with clarity: the moment she'd collapsed into his arms, the moment he'd felt that small life hidden beneath wool and sheer determination. Something fundamental had shifted in his existence. He'd spent 20 years building an empire on controlled violence and calculated intimidation, creating power through fear and maintaining order through promised consequences. Every brick had been laid deliberately, every relationship cultivated strategically, every decision made with cold assessment. Tonight, all of that machinery, every resource, every connection, every ounce of influence he'd accumulated, would be repurposed toward a completely different end. Someone had made a child into a commodity. Someone had created circumstances so terrible that a woman felt compelled to steal that child and run through frozen streets with nowhere safe to land. Someone had built a system where hospitals and police couldn't be trusted. Theron Coulter had done many things in his 43 years that he couldn't confess without facing severe consequences. He'd built his empire through methods that would never survive scrutiny. He'd made choices that kept him awake sometimes despite his practiced ability to compartmentalize. But he understood one truth with religious clarity. Some lines, once crossed, erased any remaining claim to humanity. Some acts were so fundamentally evil they demanded response, required correction, justified deploying every terrible tool in his arsenal. And those who crossed those lines, who preyed on children, who treated innocence as inventory, who built profit from suffering, deserved exactly what was coming. The war had begun. The enemy just didn't know they were already losing. The safe house occupied the 4th floor of a nondescript building on Wabash Avenue, nestled between a closed accounting firm and a 24-hour convenience store whose flickering neon sign cast intermittent blue light across cracked sidewalk. The building officially belonged to a shell corporation called Meridian Holdings, LLC, which was itself owned by another shell corporation 3 layers removed from any documentation traceable to Theron. The ground floor hosted a legitimate import business, Gregor's Official Cover, specializing in Eastern European textiles that actually turned modest profit. The 2nd and 3rd floors were vacant, deliberately kept empty through creative building code interpretation and regular payments to the right city inspectors, ensuring privacy through absence of neighbors. The 4th floor was accessible only by private elevator, requiring both magnetic keycard and biometric scan. Fingerprint reader recognizing exactly 4 prints in its database, all belonging to people Theron trusted with his life. They rode up in silence broken only by mechanical hum and the woman's shallow breathing. She'd stopped trembling from cold, but a different kind of shaking had taken its place. The aftermath of adrenaline fading, leaving exhaustion and depletion like toxins released after long fever. She kept one hand pressed flat against her coat, protective and reassuring, communicating through pressure that whoever hid beneath was safe, was okay, needed to stay quiet just a little longer. The elevator doors opened directly into the safe house's main space. No hallway, no buffer zone, just immediate access to an open-plan area with exposed brick walls sandblasted clean, industrial windows overlooking the Chicago River 3 blocks away, and furniture prioritizing function over aesthetics. A leather couch that had seen better decades, a dining table scarred with water rings and knife marks, a kitchenette stocked with non-perishables and bottled water. 3 doors leading to bedroom, bathroom, and storage. No photographs, no artwork, no personal effects. Nothing suggesting anyone actually lived here rather than using it as temporary shelter. Dr. Mikhail Revas waited by the window, positioned to see both the street below and the elevator entrance. His medical bag already open on the dining table with supplies arranged in neat rows, with the precision of someone who'd spent 40 years treating patients in circumstances ranging from legitimate emergencies to gunshot wounds that couldn't be reported. He was in his mid-60s, gray-haired and sharp-eyed, with slightly stooped posture from decades leaning over examination tables. His hands were steady despite his age, marked with old scars telling stories he'd never fully share. "Theron," he said in greeting, his accent still carrying traces of Moscow despite 40 years in America. Then he turned full attention to the woman, and his expression shifted from professional neutrality to genuine concern. "She needs fluids immediately. IV if she'll accept it. Possible hypothermia, definitely severe exhaustion and dehydration. How long has she been exposed?" "Unknown," Theron replied. "At least tonight, possibly days longer." "Wait." The woman's voice was stronger now, bolstered by warmth seeping into her bones and psychological relief of walls between her and pursuers. She stood in the center, still clutching her coat closed with both hands, still protecting her secret. Her eyes moved between Theron and the doctor with calculated assessment. "I need, before anything else, before any examination or treatment, I need to know you won't hurt her. I need your word. I need both of you to swear that if you harm her in any way, I will find a way to make you regret it even if it costs everything I have left." The threat would have been laughable coming from someone barely able to stand, probably unarmed, certainly lacking resources, except for the conviction in her voice. She meant every word. She would throw herself against any threat with suicidal determination. Her. "Show us," Theron said simply, making it invitation rather than command. The woman's hands trembled as she began unbuttoning the coat with fingers made clumsy by cold, exhaustion, and fear. The garment was several sizes too large, and as it fell open, the reason became heartbreakingly clear. Secured against her chest by an improvised fabric sling, the kind designed for carrying infants but adapted for someone slightly larger, was a child. The girl couldn't have been more than 4 years old. Dark curls that should have been glossy instead hung limp and tangled, framing a face too pale, too thin, with visible cheekbones and jaw angles that shouldn't be apparent at this age. Her eyes were open but unfocused, pupils dilated larger than they should be, possible head injury, possible shock, and possible just psychological aftermath of sustained trauma. She was awake, but silent, her small body rigid with unnatural discipline, learned through harsh instruction that making noise brought pain instead of help. She wore only a thin cotton dress, summer weight, short-sleeved, with no coat, no sweater, no shoes, no socks. Nothing. Her survival had depended entirely on the woman's body heat and the wool cocoon sheltering them both. The child's arms and legs were covered with bruises in various healing stages. Fresh purple-black marks overlaying faded yellow-green ones in patterns suggesting regular, repeated impacts. Her wrists bore faint ligature marks, thin lines of abraded skin speaking of restraints applied with enough force to break skin. Theron had witnessed cruelty in forms that would haunt lesser men into insanity. He'd participated in violence, had ordered actions resulting in pain and death, had made choices that kept him awake despite practiced compartmentalization. But something about this child, this small, silent witness to horrors she was too young to process, made his chest constrict with rage so pure it felt almost transcendent, cleansing, like fever burning infection from the body. "Her name is Arya," the woman said, her voice breaking on the name. "She doesn't speak. Hasn't spoken since, I don't know since when. Since before I found her, certainly. The silence is protective, I think. She learned that making noise brought bad things, so she stopped making noise at all." Dr. Rivas moved forward with calm authority. "May I examine her? I need to check for injuries, signs of abuse or illness, anything requiring immediate medical intervention. Whatever happened to bring her here, her health is the immediate priority." The woman, she still hadn't offered her name, hesitated visibly. Letting someone else touch Arya meant relinquishing control, accepting vulnerability, trusting that help offered was genuine rather than trap disguised as rescue. But she was also intelligent enough to recognize her limitations. She couldn't provide medical care. She couldn't diagnose internal injuries or infections. "Okay," she whispered finally. "But I stay with her. Every moment. If she gets scared, if she needs me, I have to be right there." "Of course," Dr. Rivas agreed immediately. "You're her anchor, her safety. We won't separate you unless medically necessary, and even then, only after explaining why." She carefully extracted Arya from the sling, and Theron saw the child's fingers clutch at the woman's shirt before reluctantly releasing. The separation clearly caused distress. Arya's breathing quickened. Her eyes tracked every movement with hypervigilant intensity. Her small body tensed as if preparing to run or fight, despite obvious exhaustion. Dr. Rivas guided them both to the couch, speaking in low, gentle tones, suggesting decades of experience with traumatized patients requiring special care and infinite patience. "Hello, Arya. My name is Dr. Rivas. I'm going to look at you very carefully to make sure you're healthy. I won't hurt you. If anything I do is uncomfortable, you can squeeze this lady's hand and I'll stop immediately. Does that sound acceptable?" Arya didn't respond verbally, but she gave a single, tiny nod, barely visible, more a slight lowering of her chin than actual head movement, but deliberate communication nonetheless. The examination was brief but thorough, conducted with gentle efficiency that minimized discomfort while maximizing diagnostic value. Dr. Rivas checked vital signs, examined visible bruises and marks, palpated abdomen and limbs for signs of internal injury or broken bones, and looked in ears and throat and eyes with small penlight that made Arya flinch but not pull away. Throughout the process, the woman kept one hand on Arya's shoulder, maintaining constant physical contact as both reassurance and promise. "I'm here. You're safe. I won't let anything bad happen to you." When Dr. Rivas finished, he wrapped a soft blanket around Arya's shoulders, gray fleece that swallowed her small frame, and his expression was professionally neutral in a way that barely concealed deep anger. "Malnutrition," Dr. Rivas reported, speaking to Theron but loud enough for the woman to hear because she deserved full transparency. "Moderate to severe, Based on visible muscle wasting and subcutaneous fat depletion, I'd estimate inadequate caloric intake for at least 4 to 6 months, possibly longer. Multiple contusions in various healing stages suggesting repeated blunt force trauma over extended period. Ligature marks on both wrists consistent with prolonged restraint, probably zip ties or similar narrow binding material, some scarring on her back consistent with. He paused, choosing words carefully for the child's sake. Consistent with physical discipline using an implement rather than hands. No signs of sexual trauma, thank God, but extensive psychological trauma evident in her affect and behavior. The pause before physical discipline was telling. He meant beatings, systematic infliction of pain as punishment or control, or simply entertainment for sadists. Physically, she'll recover, Dr. Rivas continued. The body is remarkably resilient at this age. Proper nutrition, rest, basic medical care. The bruises will heal. The malnutrition can be reversed. The wounds will close and scar and eventually fade. But psychologically, he paused again, and this time the weight of unspoken truth was crushing. That requires specialists, therapists who work specifically with childhood trauma and abuse, possibly years of treatment. The body heals faster than the mind, always, physically. The word carried dissertations on human suffering and resilience, and the stubborn refusal of traumatized minds to release pain even after circumstances improve. Theron walked to the kitchen and filled a glass with water, giving himself time to process, to think, to regain the emotional control that made him effective. Behind him, he heard Dr. Rivas's murmured questions and the woman's quiet answers, medical history being compiled from fragments and guesses. When he returned, the doctor was already preparing medication: children's ibuprofen for low-grade fever, antibiotics for upper respiratory infection, vitamin supplements to begin addressing malnutrition. Arya accepted everything with passive compliance of someone who'd learned that resistance brought worse consequences than obedience. She needs to stay warm, Dr. Rivas said, packing his bag with methodical precision. Small meals frequently rather than large portions her stomach can't handle after extended deprivation. And rest. As much sleep as her body will accept. The respiratory infection could become pneumonia if she doesn't get proper care, so I'll leave enough antibiotics for a full course. Make sure she takes them all even if she seems to feel better. He turned to Theron with an expression conveying both question and trust. Whatever you're planning, do it carefully. That child has been through hell. She needs stability now, consistency. Adults who don't disappear or betray trust. If you're going to help them, commit completely. Don't start something you can't finish. After the doctor left, silence settled like snow muffling sound. Arya had fallen asleep almost immediately, her small body finally surrendering now that immediate danger had receded and warmth created space for collapse. She was curled against the woman's side like a small animal seeking heat and security, breathing shallow but regular, one tiny hand still clutching fabric in a grip that didn't loosen even in sleep. The woman looked down at Arya with fierce protectiveness mixed with terror that it wouldn't be enough. That despite everything she'd sacrificed, somehow Arya would still be taken, still be hurt, still disappear into the system that had failed to protect her initially. I'm Sable, she said quietly, offering the information now that immediate crisis had passed. Sable Thorne, that's my real name. And before you wonder how you'll verify anything I tell you, I worked at a club called the Raven Room. You were there occasionally for meetings. I saw you, recognized you tonight outside the Opera House, and made a calculated gamble that you might be dangerous in the right ways. So that explained how she'd known to approach him specifically. She'd made the connection between the man she'd seen commanding fear at the club and the figure standing outside the opera house. "Why did you approach me specifically?" Theron asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. "Outside the cadence tonight. You could have chosen anyone." Sable considered the question for a long moment, her fingers still moving absently through Arya's tangled curls. "Because you looked like someone who'd been where we are now. Frightened. Running. Knowing that safety was an illusion and power was the only thing that mattered." She paused, gathering thoughts or courage. "And because I'd seen you at the club. When you walked through, people became very quiet and very careful. I figured anyone who scared people that dangerous might be dangerous enough to frighten away the people hunting us." Cold logic, enemy of my enemy reasoning that had probably saved her life. "How long have you been running?" 3 days. 72 hours since I took her and walked out. We've been moving constantly, hiding during day, moving at night, spending what little cash I had on cheap motels that don't ask questions or check IDs. I knew eventually they'd track me through credit cards or phone records or surveillance cameras, so I destroyed everything electronic, everything trackable, made myself a ghost. But ghosts still need food and shelter, and I ran out of money yesterday afternoon. Been on the street since then, trying to figure out what to do next, where to go, who might possibly help without immediately turning us in for reward money, or just calling authorities because they don't want to be involved in something this complicated. 3 days of sustained terror, 3 days of carrying a child through freezing weather, keeping her warm through body contact, finding safe places to rest when rest became necessary for survival. 3 days of looking over her shoulder constantly. "Tell me everything," Theron said, pulling a chair across from the couch and sitting with deliberate slowness. "From the beginning. I need to understand the complete picture. Who's hunting you? Why they want Arya? What resources they have? What you know about their operation? Don't leave anything out. I can't protect you effectively if I'm working with incomplete information." Sable drew a shaky breath, her arm tightening protectively around Arya. "I worked for them. Not willingly at first. I needed money. Couldn't find other work. Made bad choices that put me in bad situations. Eventually, I didn't have a choice anymore. They controlled everything. Where I lived, where I worked, who I talked to. I was essentially property." She stopped, swallowing hard. "I was a waitress at the Raven Room. You know the kind of place it is, where illegal things happen in back rooms and everyone knows not to ask questions or look too closely. Drugs, gambling, prostitution, all of it happening simultaneously while management pretends the restaurant is legitimate." Theron knew the Raven Room's reputation, had done business there occasionally because its owners facilitated useful connections. He'd suspected deeper criminality but hadn't investigated because it didn't impact his operations. That lack of curiosity now felt like complicity. "Arya was brought in 6 months ago," Sable continued, her voice dropping to barely above whisper. "I don't know from where. They never said, and asking questions was dangerous. She was just there one day, in a room upstairs. They kept children there sometimes. Not many, just a few at a time. Always for short periods, maybe a week or two, before they were moved somewhere else, transported, sold to buyers, trafficking. The word didn't need to be spoken to hang in the air like toxic gas." "I wasn't supposed to interact with any of them," Sable said, tears beginning to track down her face though her voice remained steady. "Staff had explicit orders. Don't talk to the children. Don't acknowledge them, and don't develop any attachment. They were products, not people. She paused, visibly gathering herself. But one night, about 2 months after Arya arrived, I heard crying, soft, muffled, the sound of someone trying very hard not to make noise but unable to completely suppress it. I went upstairs, even though I knew I shouldn't, and I found Arya alone in this room with no heat, no blanket, no food or water. Just bare mattress on the floor and 4 walls and a lock on the outside of the door. Sable's fingers tightened in Arya's hair. She was crying, just sitting there in the corner, arms wrapped around her knees, crying so quietly. And when I opened the door and came in, she stopped immediately. Just stopped, like a switch being flipped. Her eyes went wide and she pulled her knees tighter and she was just waiting for whatever bad thing my presence meant. She'd learned that making noise brought punishment, Theron said quietly. Yes, she'd learned that adults were threats, that presence meant pain, that the only safety was in silence and stillness. Sable wiped tears from her face. I couldn't just walk away after that. I knew it was dangerous, knew I was risking my own safety, but I couldn't be another person who saw her suffering and did nothing. So I started bringing her food. Small things I could sneak from the kitchen, blankets from the supply closet. I'd talk to her softly while I was there, not expecting response, but just wanting her to hear a human voice that wasn't angry or threatening. Did she ever respond? Sometimes she'd look at me, just briefly. After a few weeks, she started eating the food while I was in the room instead of waiting until I left. That felt like progress, like she was beginning to trust that I wouldn't hurt her. Sable's expression hardened with determination. 3 days ago, I overheard them talking about the transport. 2 of the brothers who run the operation, Alexei and Victor, talking about moving Arya and 2 other children to a buyer in Wisconsin, a private estate, big money. The buyer wanted young ones specifically. She stopped, unable to continue that thought. I knew if I didn't act immediately, she'd be gone forever. Disappeared into whatever system that buyer represented. No one would find her. No one would know what happened. So you took her. I waited until my shift ended. Told the manager I was going home sick. Headache, nausea, nothing suspicious. Then instead of leaving, I went upstairs. Arya was alone. I wrapped her in this coat, told her we were going to play the quiet game, that she needed to be silent no matter what happened, and that if she could do that, I'd take her somewhere safe. Then I walked out the front door like I had every right to be there. The audacity was impressive. Walking out with stolen child under their noses, relying on assumption that no one would challenge departing staff. How long before they realized? Theron asked. I don't know exactly. I didn't wait to find out. I just ran. Dumped my phone in a river, destroyed my credit cards, and avoided cameras as much as possible. Kept moving, kept Arya warm, kept us both fed on cash I'd been saving for months. 3 days of running before I ran out of resources and options and ended up outside that opera house. The story painted a clear picture. The Raven Room was a node in a larger trafficking network. The brothers running it had resources and connections. They'd lost valuable property and would be hunting aggressively. Sable and Arya were dead if found. Simple as that. Theron stood and walked to the window overlooking the street, watching sparse late-night traffic. Behind him, he heard Sable's breathing even out slightly as she processed having finally told the complete story to someone who might be able to help. He'd been younger than Arya when they'd taken him. 8 years old, walking home from school in Prague, accepting what seemed like a kind offer of a ride. The next 13 months had been systematic destruction of everything that made him a child instead of a commodity, beaten when he cried, starved when he didn't obey, taught through pain that his value was determined entirely by others' desires. He'd been lucky, if that word could apply to any part of such horror. A police raid had liberated 23 children, including him. But rescue had come too late to repair what was broken. He'd returned to his mother as something different, harder, colder, fundamentally altered. His mother never recovered from the year of not knowing. She died when he was 14. Doctors called it heart failure, but Theron knew it was grief and guilt. By 16, Theron had learned to use his rage constructively. He'd built power from pain, transformed helplessness into control. The next 27 years had been dedicated to accumulating power and establishing dominance. But he'd made rules, absolute rules. Children were untouchable. Anyone who dealt in human trafficking, especially child trafficking, was eliminated without warning or mercy. Now a woman and child who'd escaped exactly that kind of evil had literally collapsed into his arms. And she'd been exactly right. He understood what it meant to be frantic and terrified, to know that safety had to be built through violence because designed systems had failed. He pulled out his phone and sent a text to Naveen, his head of security. Need complete workup on trafficking operation running out of River North Club called the Raven Room. Want names, organizational structure, locations, financial trails, protection networks, weak points. Priority 1. Everything you can find by noon tomorrow. The response came within 20 seconds. Should I assume this is personal? Theron typed. Assume this is war. These people have something that belongs under my protection now. I want every piece of information that exists about their operation. Cost is irrelevant. Speed is everything. He turned back to Sable, who was watching him with mixture of hope and fear. The people hunting you are called the Koslov family. 4 brothers running a trafficking network with the Raven Room as one of several locations. They have money, connections, and corrupt officials on their payroll. They're dangerous and determined. Sable's face went pale. You know them? I know of them. I've done business in adjacent spaces, but never directly with their trafficking operations because that's a line I don't cross. But I know their reputation, know they're protected by local corruption, and know they've been operating for years without significant law enforcement interference. Can you? She stopped, unable to finish the question. Can I protect you? Yes. Can I stop them from ever threatening you or Arya again? Also yes. But it won't be fast or clean or simple. They have infrastructure that needs to be dismantled systematically. Going after them directly would trigger their protection network. I need to be strategic. He moved closer, looking directly at Sable. You and Arya stay here. This location is secure. No one knows about it except 4 people I trust with my life. You have food, medical supplies, everything you need. Stay hidden while I work on permanently solving the threat. It might take days, but when it's done, the Koslov family won't be in a position to threaten anyone ever again. Why would you do this? Sable asked, exhausted. You don't know us. You don't owe us anything. Why commit to something this complicated and dangerous for 2 strangers? Theron was quiet for a long moment, weighing how much truth to offer. Finally, he said, because I was 8 years old when men decided I was property instead of person. I spent 13 months being treated the way Arya was treated, as commodity, as inventory, as thing rather than human being. I was rescued eventually, but that year destroyed parts of me that never healed properly. He glanced at Arya, sleeping peacefully now. I built power specifically so I'd never be helpless again. And part of what makes it meaningful rather than just empty control is using it to ensure others don't suffer the way I suffered. You asked for help from someone you thought might understand. You were right. I understand completely. And now that you've asked, now that I've seen what was done to her, I can't walk away. Sable nodded slowly, tears sliding down her face again. Relief this time. Thank you. I don't have anything to offer in return except gratitude, but I mean it with everything I have. Get some rest, Theron said gently. You're both safe tonight. Tomorrow we start building permanent safety. But right now, sleep. Let your body recover. Trust that I'll handle what needs handling. He waited until Sable's breathing evened out, until she'd finally surrendered to exhaustion. Waited until both woman and child were sleeping deeply. Then he pulled out his phone again and began making calls, assembling the team, setting in motion the machinery that would dismantle the Kozlov Empire piece by methodical piece. The brothers had days of normal operations left, maybe less. They just didn't know it yet. Morning arrived with gray light filtering through industrial windows, turning the Chicago River into liquid steel beneath low clouds, promising more snow. Theron had spent the night in the safe house's single chair, positioned with clear sight lines to both the door and the couch, where Sable and Arya slept tangled together. He'd dozed intermittently in the way he'd learned during his 20s. Light sleep, hovering just below full consciousness, maintaining enough awareness to react instantly to threat while allowing his body necessary rest. His mind, even in sleep, continued working through variables and strategies. Sable stirred first, consciousness returning with sharp awareness of someone who'd learned never to fully trust peace. Her eyes opened and immediately found Arya, verifying the child was still there, still breathing, still safe. Only after that confirmation did she scan the room and locate Theron. You stayed, she said quietly, careful not to wake Arya. Did you think I wouldn't? I didn't know what to think. People don't usually help without wanting something in return. Coffee? They moved to the kitchenette, speaking in hushed tones while Arya slept. Theron had already brewed a pot, the bitter aroma filling the space with warmth. He poured 2 cups, sliding one across the counter to Sable, who wrapped both hands around it. My people have been working through the night, he said without preamble, pulling out his tablet and opening files. The Raven Room is a front for a trafficking operation run by the Kozlov family. 4 brothers, all Russian immigrants who arrived in the early 2000s and built their organization through combination of legitimate business and criminal enterprise. They've been operating for nearly 15 years, moving an estimated 100 to 150 children annually through Chicago alone. Sable's knuckles whitened around the coffee cup. 150 children every year for 15 years. At minimum, possibly more. The numbers are conservative estimates. Theron swiped to show photographs, surveillance images captured overnight. This is Alexei Kozlov. He's the eldest brother, 47 years old, former Russian military intelligence. He runs the overall operation and handles relationships with corrupt officials. Ruthless, intelligent, no conscience whatsoever. The photograph showed a well-dressed man with hard eyes. Dmitry Kozlov, Theron continued, swiping to the next image. 43, handles logistics and transportation. He arranges movement of children between locations, coordinates with buyers, manages the supply chain. He's also the one who beat Arya based on injury patterns Dr. Rivas identified. Viktor Kozlov, third image, 40. Responsible for security and enforcement. He makes sure no one talks, no one steals, no one interferes. 3 suspected murders connected to him, though nothing provable. Pavel Koslov. Final image. 38. Handles finances and money laundering. He's the smartest academically, degree in finance from University of Moscow, and he's built a complex system for moving trafficking revenue through legitimate businesses. Sable studied the faces with intensity. How do we stop them? By making them vulnerable first. Theron pulled up more files, financial documents, organizational charts, lists of names. Their power comes from 3 sources: money, connections, and fear. We systematically remove all 3 until they're exposed and vulnerable. Then we let law enforcement do what they should have been doing if corruption hadn't blocked it. He explained the strategy in detail. The Kozlovs maintained protection through payments to corrupt officials, police officers, judges, social workers, politicians. That corruption network needed to be neutralized first. We identify everyone on their payroll, Theron said. Then we give each person a choice: cooperate with federal authorities and testify against the Kozlovs, or have their corruption exposed in ways that destroy their careers and freedom. Most will choose self-preservation. What about the Kozlovs themselves? They'll be arrested on federal charges bypassing local corruption, trafficking, racketeering, money laundering, tax evasion. We build an evidence package so comprehensive that even their best lawyers can't create reasonable doubt. Then we coordinate with FBI to execute simultaneous raids on all their locations. Sable processed this. How long will it take? 10 days. Maybe less if we move efficiently. Theron saw her expression shift toward panic. I know that's not fast enough, that every day they're operational is another day children suffer. But rushing this creates risk that they'll escape or relocate. We do this correctly the first time, because we won't get a second chance. What happens to Arya and me while you're doing all this? You stay here. This location is off any grid they might access. No one can connect it to me. You have everything you need for 2 weeks minimum. Gregor will check in daily. Dr. Rivas will visit every other day to monitor Arya's recovery. And after? Sable asked. After the Koslovs are arrested? What happens to us then? Theron had been thinking about this. That depends on what you want. If you want to disappear completely, new city, new identities, fresh start. I can arrange that. Financial support, housing, job placement, everything necessary. Or you stay here, in Chicago. I can provide ongoing security, a protected apartment, legitimate employment that pays enough to support you both. Access to therapists for Arya, support networks, community resources. Sable was quiet for a long moment. Why would you continue helping after the immediate threat is resolved? Because you'll always be somewhat vulnerable as long as you're alone and without resources, Theron said honestly. Systems fail people like you constantly. If you don't have money, connections, someone willing to stand between you and threats, you remain targets. I can provide those things if you're willing to accept them. Before Sable could respond, Arya stirred on the couch, her small body shifting restlessly before her eyes opened. She looked around with brief disorientation, panic beginning to form before she registered Sable and Theron. Good morning, sweetheart, Sable said gently, moving to sit beside her. You're safe, remember? This is the place I told you about, where we're going to stay until the bad people can't find us anymore. Arya nodded slowly, her eyes finding Theron and holding his gaze longer than she had the night before. Theron kept his posture open and non-threatening. Are you hungry, Arya? I have cereal, toast, and fruit. Whatever sounds good to you. The child didn't speak but nodded with slightly more confidence. Over the next hour, they established morning routine. Arya accepted small portions of food, eating slowly. She allowed prescribed medications without resistance. She accepted clean clothes Theron had arranged to have delivered. Children's clothing in her approximate size, soft fabrics in gentle colors. Theron watched this small person who'd survived horrors that would have destroyed adults. She'd been broken by people who should have protected her, but she hadn't been destroyed. Something resilient lived in her still. Before leaving, Theron knelt at Arya's eye level, non-threatening posture. I'm going to go take care of some things today, Arya. Work things that will help keep you safe. But I'll be back tonight, and Sable will be here with you the whole time. If you need anything at all, she can call me and I'll help however I can. Does that sound okay? Arya studied his face with unsettling intensity, reading him with perceptiveness trauma had taught. Whatever she saw must have been acceptable, because she gave a small nod, then did something surprising. She reached out and placed her tiny hand on his for just a moment before pulling back. The gesture was brief, but loaded with meaning. Trust offered tentatively. Outside, the winter day was brutally cold, but clear. Theron's phone was already buzzing with updates. Naveen had been working through the night and had comprehensive intelligence ready. The war to protect one small girl had officially begun. Detective Marcus Lorne had been on the Chicago Police Department for 19 years, 16 of them dirty. The Kosloff family had owned him since gambling debts spiraled, beyond his ability to repay legitimately. What started as looking the other way had metastasized. Lost evidence, doctored reports, and warnings about investigations. On Tuesday morning, day 4 of Theron's plan, an unmarked envelope appeared in Marcus's department mailbox. Inside were photocopies of bank statements showing $4,500 deposited monthly for the past 3 years. A note: Internal Affairs receives originals in 48 hours unless you call this number. Marcus's hands shook. Whoever compiled this had access to records that should have been buried behind firewalls. Professional work. He called from a burner phone during lunch, standing in a grocery store parking lot 3 miles from the precinct. A man's voice answered on the first ring, calm, professional, emotionless. Detective Lorne, thank you for calling promptly. Who are you? Someone who can make your corruption disappear or ensure it destroys everything. Your choice. The voice paused. The Kozlov family no longer owns you. I've neutralized their other department assets. You're alone. Will you save yourself? What do you want? Information. Everything about the Kozlov operation. Locations, personnel, schedules, clients, protection network. Documentation for every case you compromised. Then you retire for medical reasons and disappear somewhere warm with your pension. If I refuse? Internal Affairs gets evidence, federal investigators get involved, and you retire in a cell. Former officers don't fare well in federal facilities. The Koslovs will kill me. They'll be too busy with their own destruction. By the time they realize, you'll be safely retired. I protect my assets. Give me what I need. You walk clean. Marcus spent 6 hours compiling everything, working from home and pulling files from hidden drives, documentation he'd kept as insurance. By midnight, he'd assembled comprehensive pictures, 4 holding locations beyond the Raven Room, 8 crooked cops, 4 compromised judges, client lists spanning 3 states, financial records showing $2.3 million monthly revenue. The courier at 1 a.m. wore gloves and said nothing. Marcus watched him leave, then poured whiskey and began drafting medical retirement paperwork. By morning, he'd be another burned-out cop citing PTSD. By day 6, Theron reviewed Marcus's intelligence with Naveen and Gregor in his legitimate downtown office. They'd closed blinds and spread documents across the polished table like generals planning campaign. 4 locations total, Naveen summarized, pointing to marked addresses on a Chicago city map. Raven Room is intake, 3 holding facilities by age group. Warehouse in Inglewood holds youngest, infants to age 6. Apartment in Pilsen holds 7 to 12. House in Bridgeport holds teenagers. Security? Theron asked. 2 guards each location, armed but not professional. Mostly hired muscle paid weekly in cash. Not loyal, just employed. Remove paycheck and they evaporate. Surveillance? Basic, consumer-grade cameras at entrances, nothing sophisticated. No backup power, no remote monitoring. Cut power, and you blind them completely. Theron studied the map. We need federal involvement. This is beyond what we can handle without triggering a gang war. But federal agencies move slowly. What about FBI agent Sarah Voss? Gregor suggested, sliding a file across. She's been investigating trafficking networks, hitting brick walls because local corruption blocks her. I've worked with her before. She's clean, dedicated, frustrated, and hungry for opportunity to actually make arrests that stick. Can she move quickly? If you give her everything Marcus provided, she can have warrants and tactical teams ready within 72 hours. She's been building parallel cases but lacking concrete evidence. This gives her everything she needs to bypass local authorities. Theron nodded. Set up a meeting. Anonymous dead drop. She gets the complete intelligence package with one condition: simultaneous raids on all 4 locations. We can't risk them getting warning that one facility was hit. What about the Kozlov brothers themselves? Naveen asked. They won't be at these locations during raids. Alexei operates from his Glencoe estate. The others have separate residences. We need to ensure they're arrested too. Financial crimes, Theron decided. The trafficking charges will stick to their organization, but we need separate charges tying directly to the brothers personally: money laundering, tax evasion, racketeering. He pulled up a spreadsheet. Pavel handles finances, which makes him vulnerable. These accounts show him personally signing off on transactions connected to trafficking revenue. That's direct involvement, not deniable distance. If we feed this to the IRS along with FBI, they'll have federal warrants that supersede any local protection. Over the next 48 hours, days 7 and 8, the machine deployed with surgical precision. Agent Voss received a package delivered through a cutout. Manila envelope left in a specific trash can at a specific time, picked up according to encrypted email instructions. She spent 18 hours verifying intelligence, cross-referencing financial records and surveillance photos. Then she began assembling the largest coordinated operation her field office had conducted in 5 years. Meanwhile, 3 more detectives on Kozlov payroll received similar envelopes and similar calls. All 3 chose cooperation, providing additional documentation filling gaps in Marcus's intelligence. By day 9, Thursday, the Chicago Police Department's corruption infrastructure had collapsed. The Kozlov's early warning system dismantled without them realizing silence meant danger. Judge Harold Pemberton received his envelope Friday morning, day 10, while drinking coffee in chambers. The evidence was irrefutable. 6 cases dismissed on technicalities, judicial decisions favoring Kozlov interests, communications with defense attorneys, proving coordination. The message was simple: Recuse yourself from all Kozlov-related cases immediately and announce early retirement due to health concerns. Do this by Monday, or federal investigators receive everything Tuesday morning. Pemberton sat for 3 hours, understanding his career was over regardless. Cooperation meant controlled exit, refusal meant federal prison. He drafted his retirement announcement that evening, citing heart problems and family considerations. By day 10, Sunday, the Kozlov family's protection network had been systematically neutralized. 8 compromised cops were cooperating or retiring. 4 judges had recused themselves or announced retirement. Social workers taking kickbacks had received warnings and begun distancing themselves. The brothers remained oblivious, interpreting unusual quiet as normalcy rather than recognizing it as silence preceding storm. Theron sat in the safe house Sunday evening, updating Sable while Arya colored at the table, creating scenes of houses with gardens and birds. The raids happened Tuesday morning, day 12, Theron said quietly. 4 locations simultaneously, FBI tactical teams. They'll liberate any children currently held and arrest everyone on site. Sable's relief was visible. How many children? Surveillance estimates 12 to 18, ages 3 to 16. Federal protective custody initially, then specialized care facilities. And the Kozlovs? Federal warrants for all 4 brothers. Trafficking, racketeering, money laundering. They'll spend life in federal prison. Tears slid down Sable's face. Overwhelming relief. Those children. Because of what you did. What we did. You saved Arya first. Everything else followed from that choice. Arya held up her drawing. 2 figures holding hands beneath a yellow sun, surrounded by flowers. That's beautiful, sweetheart, Sable said, kneeling beside her. Arya nodded, and for the first time she smiled fully, not tentative, but genuine happiness. Theron's phone buzzed. Agent Voss confirming preparations complete. 0 hour, Tuesday, 5 a.m. 48 hours, he said, then it's finished. Tuesday morning, day 12, arrived with bitter cold. At 4:47 a.m., 4 FBI tactical teams took positions, waiting for synchronized go order, the largest trafficking raid the region had seen. Theron watched from surveillance vehicle 3 blocks from the Inglewood warehouse, monitoring multiple feeds from body cameras. Agent Voss sat beside him, reviewing final checklists with focused intensity. All teams ready, communications announced. Weather clear, no civilian traffic, conditions optimal. Execute on my mark, Voss said steadily. 3, 2, 1. Mark. 4 locations erupted in coordinated action. Doors breached with hydraulic rams, teams flowing through with practiced precision, voices shouting commands through pre-dawn silence. Flashbangs disoriented guards who surrendered without resistance. The warehouse yielded 6 children, ages 3 to 6, found in converted office space with institutional cribs and minimal furniture. No toys, no books. The children were silent when agents entered, too traumatized to cry even during rescue. Pilsen apartment held 5 more, ages 7 to 11, locked in 2 bedrooms with blackout curtains. One tried to run when agents entered, fight or flight interpreting all adults as threat. An agent caught her gently, speaking softly until panic subsided. Bridgeport House was empty. Teenagers moved 3 days earlier, but the basement held chains, cameras, soundproofing. Evidence that would haunt agents for years. The Raven Room yielded 2 children plus comprehensive records. Client lists, financial transactions, transportation schedules, and communications with overseas contacts. Overwhelming, damning evidence. All targets secured. Communications announced at 5:23 a.m. 13 children recovered, 17 suspects in custody, 0 law enforcement casualties. Voss exhaled slowly. Your intelligence was perfect. What happens to the children? Federal protective custody, medical evaluation, trauma assessment, stabilization. Then, specialized foster services, counselors standing by, medical staff, child psychologists, everything they need. By noon, all 4 Kozlov brothers were in federal custody. Alexei tried to run, intercepted at O'Hare. Dmitri surrendered without resistance. Victor required restraint after attempting to destroy computers. Pavel was found surrounded by shredded documents, his destruction attempt coming hours too late. News broke by evening. Massive trafficking ring dismantled. Media speculation ran rampant. No one mentioned the shadow architect. Theron returned to the safe house late Tuesday, exhausted but satisfied. Sable met him at the door. It's done? It's done. 13 children safe, 4 brothers arrested, operation dismantled. Sable's legs gave out. Theron caught her, echo of their first meeting, while she sobbed. I can't believe they're actually gone. They're gone. You're safe. Arya's safe. And 13 children are alive because you had courage to run. Over the following week, the safe house transformed. Arya continued gradual emergence, still silent but more present, more willing to engage. She discovered children's television, watched with fascination, laughed soundlessly. Dr. Rivas visited daily. The trauma locked something inside. Speech requires feeling safe enough to make noise. For Arya, silence was survival. Reversing that takes time and consistent safety. Theron arranged comprehensive support, trauma-specialized therapists, speech pathologists, pediatric care. Financial resources finally had concrete, redemptive purpose. He also spent time simply being present, reading to Arya, teaching card games requiring no speaking, sitting in comfortable silence while she drew increasingly complex pictures. One evening, Arya held up her latest drawing, a figure in dark coat standing between small figures and dark scribbles. She pointed at the dark-coated figure, then at him. Is this you? Theron nodded. Yes, but you're safe now. Arya studied his face, memorizing details. Then she added something. A small yellow heart near the dark-coated figure. Sable pressed her hand to her mouth, overwhelmed. In a traumatized 4-year-old's vocabulary, this was the highest compliment. Recognition of protection. Gratitude for safety. Then Arya did something unprecedented. She climbed into his lap and wrapped small arms around his neck in complete trust. Theron went still. Over her shoulder, he met Sable's eyes and saw revelation reflected. They'd stumbled into something that transcended rescue, something that looked like family. 3 weeks after raids, day 33 of their journey, Sable received documentation that should have been impossible. Adoption papers showing Arya as her legal daughter, complete with court filings and judges' signatures. How? Sable asked, holding papers carefully. I know people who create legitimate documentation. Every piece is real. Court filings, background checks, home studies by actual social workers. The system worked as designed. Just faster than usual because I ensured the right people prioritized your case. She's really mine, legally, permanently. She's really yours. Relief transformed into deeper joy. Sable looked at Arya building block structures. What happens now? We can't stay here forever. Theron pulled out a folder. 3 options. Your choice. Option 1. Complete relocation. New city, new identities if you want them. Financial support, housing, job placement, San Diego, Portland, Austin, large enough to disappear, small enough to build community. Sable listened. Option 2. Stay in Chicago under real names. Security, protected apartment, legitimate employment supporting you comfortably, access to therapists for ARIA, support networks, community resources. And option 3? Theron hesitated. I own a building in Lincoln Park. Ground level commercial, second floor could be converted into apartment for you and Aria. Third floor is where I live. Separate entrances, complete privacy. Commercial space could become whatever you wanted. Cafe, bookstore, and art studio. I'd cover renovations. You'd own the business. The offer's implications extended beyond geography into ongoing connection, continued protection, chosen family. Why continue helping after the threat is resolved? Because I've spent 20 years building power in deliberate isolation. Every connection was strategic, every relationship transactional. I perfected being untouchable, which is another way of saying unbearably alone. He glanced at Arya. You two breached defenses I thought were permanent, and now that they're breached, I find I don't want to rebuild them. Arya deserves stability, Sable said carefully. She needs consistency, predictability, adults who remain constant. If we choose option 3 and you decide later it's too complicated, that instability could damage her recovery. I understand. I'm making this offer with full commitment. If you choose Lincoln Park, I'm choosing to be part of your lives permanently. Not as savior maintaining distance, but as someone who wants to be present for boring, ordinary moments as much as significant ones. Someone who shows up for school events and birthday parties and random Tuesday dinners. Sable studied his face. I need time to think. A week later, Sable found him reviewing quarterly reports. She sat across from him. Lincoln Park. We choose Lincoln Park. You're certain? I'm terrified, but certain. Arya needs positive male presence. Consistent. Safe. You've proven you can be that. And I need it too. I need to know someone's watching our backs. Then we'll make it work. Together. The move happened gradually. They purchased furniture together. Sable preferring comfortable over expensive. Second floor renovated with psychologist input. Spaces designed to feel safe. Colors chosen for calming properties. Commercial space became a children's bookstore. Sable's idea, recognizing stories' therapeutic power. They filled it with carefully curated titles. Brave children, found families, stories where kindness triumphed. Tales acknowledging darkness but promising light. Opening day, Arya wore a yellow dress. First truly new clothing since liberation. Still silent, but helping. Arranging books by color, building displays, greeting customers with small waves. Theron helped with register during busy periods, discovering unexpected enjoyment in mundane commerce. He recommended books based on actual reading, engaged with parents, gradually became neighborhood fabric. Months passed. Arya started kindergarten at a trauma-informed school where selective mutism was accommodated. Teachers reported she communicated beautifully through drawings and writing once she'd learned. Advanced vocabulary, sophisticated understanding. Silence was protective mechanism, not cognitive limitation. Sable thrived. The bookstore became community space hosting story hours and parent groups. She built friendships, constructed support networks beyond Theron. Theron found himself invited to Arya's events, art shows, holiday performances, where she'd learned sign language, parent-teacher conferences praising her resilience. Each invitation felt like trust renewed. Late autumn, nearly 8 months after that February night, Theron shared dinner in Sable's apartment. Arya had eaten and was watching television. Small body relaxed. The Koslov brothers were sentenced this week, Theron mentioned quietly. Life without parole. Federal supermax. No possibility of release. Sable nodded. Good. Won't undo anything, but they can't hurt anyone else. All recovered children are placed now, some with relatives, others with specialized foster families. Agent Voss says they're healing at varying rates, but all moving forward. Arya asked about you yesterday, Sable said. Well, wrote it on her whiteboard. Is Theron my dad? Theron froze. What did you tell her? That families come in many forms, that people who protect and love and choose to stay become family even if biology says different. I told her you cared deeply and would always be part of our lives if she wanted. Her response? She drew us holding hands. So I think she wants that. I've done terrible things, Sable. My hands aren't clean. I know, but you've chosen to protect rather than destroy. Maybe redemption isn't erasing the past. Maybe it's choosing what you build with the power you have. From the couch, Arya made a sound, actual vocalization that might have been his name. Both turned immediately. She tried again, concentrating. Theron. Rough, unpracticed, but clear. Deliberate, intentional. Tears tracked down Sable's face. Theron couldn't speak. Arya slid off the couch and walked to them, taking Sable's hand, then Theron's, joining them with her small fingers. Family, she whispered. Second word, somehow more powerful. Theron looked at this woman who'd collapsed into his arms 8 months ago, at this child hidden beneath a winter coat carrying nothing but terror and hope. They'd all been broken differently, all failed by systems designed to protect, all forced to build safety from unlikely materials. But they'd survived? More than survived. They'd found each other and constructed something worth protecting. Chosen family assembled from trauma survivors who'd learned the bravest thing was trusting again, loving again, hoping again, despite every reason not to. Yes, he said finally, voice rough. Family. Spring arrived gently, Chicago thawing with cherry blossoms lining Lincoln Park streets like pink snow. Through once-upon-a-page windows, sunlight illuminated shelves where Arya sat reading aloud to neighborhood children. She was 6 now, curls longer and shinier, face fuller, the too old quality completely faded. She wore a purple dress with embroidered stars. Her choice, selected with serious deliberation. And the dragon realized, Arya read clearly, voice strong and confident, that being brave didn't mean you weren't afraid. It meant doing the right thing even when your heart was pounding. She looked up at her young audience. Sometimes the bravest thing is asking for help when you need it. Children nodded solemnly, absorbing wisdom from someone barely older but infinitely more experienced. Sable stood at the register processing sales, her transformation complete. The haunted fear had been replaced by confident competence, stress-induced thinness by healthy curves, and hypervigilance by comfortable awareness of safety. The bookstore had become exactly what Sable envisioned, not just business but community space where children who'd experienced trauma could find stories reflecting their struggles. They hosted weekly story hours, monthly author visits, and support groups for foster and adoptive parents. Mom, can we do dragon stories for next week? Arya called out, already planning ahead. Absolutely, sweetheart. We'll plan it at dinner. The casual exchange, mom and sweetheart and planning dinner together, represented miracles requiring 2 years of therapy, patience, and consistent safety. Arya had spent 18 months in selective mutism treatment, gradually reclaiming her voice through play therapy, art therapy, and patient adults who never pressured but always welcomed. The door chimed. Theron entered carrying Italian takeout, Saturday tradition. Papa, did you get the breadsticks? Arya's face lit up. Would I forget the breadsticks? He set bags on the counter and ruffled her hair as she darted past. The title Papa had been Arya's invention. Not quite Dad because that felt too common, but not Theron because that felt too distant. Papa Theron acknowledged their relationship's uniqueness while claiming him as hers. The first time she'd used it, he'd had to leave the room to compose himself. They closed the store following routine. Lights off in sequence, register balanced, door locked, alarm set. Climbed stairs to the second-floor apartment where dinner waited. Shared a meal while Arya described her dragon story in elaborate detail. Plot transparently therapeutic, working through experiences by transforming them into fiction where she controlled the narrative. Later that evening, while Arya built with magnetic tiles, Sable and Theron sat on the balcony overlooking the street. Evening was warm enough for light sweaters, watching neighbors walk dogs and couples stroll hand in hand. The Koslov brothers were sentenced this week, Theron mentioned quietly. Life without parole, all four. Federal supermax facilities. Sable nodded, processing information that felt distant now. Good. Won't undo anything, but at least they can't hurt anyone else. All 13 recovered children are permanently placed now, he continued. Some with located relatives, others with foster families trained for trafficking trauma. Agent Voss sends updates. Says they're healing at varying rates, but all moving forward, all building lives that would have been impossible 2 years ago. Inside, Arya had abandoned magnetic tiles and retrieved her sketchbook, approaching them with her latest work. Detailed portrait of the three of them standing before the bookstore, surrounded by children holding books and flowers. For the store, she explained seriously, so people know we're a family that believes in stories and second chances and the power of asking for help. It's beautiful, sweetheart, Sable said, voice thick with emotion. We'll frame it professionally and hang it in the front window. Arya nodded, satisfied, then retreated to her art. Theron watched this child who'd been hidden beneath a winter coat, silent and terrified, now confident enough to create and share and claim space without apology. She asked yesterday about visiting the other recovered children someday, Sable said quietly. Said she thinks they might understand things other people don't. That maybe building community with other survivors could help everyone heal. What did you tell her? That we'd talk to Dr. Chen about it. That if everyone's ready and therapists think it's appropriate, creating support networks among survivors might be healing. Sable paused. She's going to be an advocate, Theron. At 6 years old, she's already thinking about how to help others who've been through similar experiences. She's taking her pain and transforming it into purpose. She learned that from you, Theron observed. You could have run and hidden and focused only on survival. Instead, you've built community, created resources, made yourself visible so others know they're not alone. As darkness settled over the city, Theron thought about trajectory, how one act of courage outside an opera house had cascaded into transformation for multiple lives. 13 children safe and building futures. A woman who'd risked everything to save one child now supporting dozens through community building. A man who'd weaponized power learning to wield it toward healing and protection. His phone buzzed. Message from Gregor. The final contract came through. You're officially out of everything questionable. Clean operations only from here forward. Legitimate all the way down. 2 years of careful extraction, and finally his business empire operated entirely above board. He'd retained power, money, influence, connections, but redirected it toward legal ends. People who'd once feared him now respected him as businessman and philanthropist, whose charitable foundation funded trafficking prevention and trauma recovery. "What are you thinking?" Sable asked, reading his expression with familiarity. "That 2 years ago, I was standing outside an opera house thinking about how isolated I'd become, how power had separated me from genuine human connection." He took her hand. "Then you collapsed into my arms and everything changed. Those barriers I thought were permanent turned out to be far more fragile than I'd believed." Inside, Arya had fallen asleep on the couch, sketchbook open across her lap, marker still loosely held. Theron lifted her carefully, carrying her to her bedroom. Lavender walls, shelves filled with books and art supplies, windows offering views of safe streets. He tucked her in, pulling the star-patterned quilt to her shoulders. She stirred slightly, murmuring with trust, "Love you, Papa." "Love you too, little one," he whispered back. In the hallway, Sable waited, watching with the contentment of someone who'd survived impossible circumstances and found genuine joy on the other side. They returned to the living room, to the life they'd built from courage and the revolutionary belief that broken people could heal if given safety and support and time. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I'd chosen someone else outside the opera house?" Sable asked. "If I'd approached anyone else that night?" "I think you chose correctly because you saw something in me I'd forgotten existed. The part that remembered being helpless, the part that promised I'd protect others once I had power." Theron pulled her close. "You saw the survivor beneath the armor, and you trusted that survivor to understand what you needed. Best gamble I ever made." They sat in comfortable silence as the city settled into nightly rhythm. Somewhere out there, 12 other children were sleeping safely, healing at their own pace, building their own futures. Somewhere, families were being built from choice rather than biology. And here, in this apartment above a children's bookstore in Lincoln Park, 3 people who'd all survived different hells had created their own small heaven. Imperfect and complicated, but infinitely precious, because they'd chosen it together. Because they'd decided that the bravest thing was reaching for connection, despite every reason fear provided to remain isolated. The collapse that had started everything had lasted only seconds. Momentum and gravity bringing Sable into Theron's arms outside an opera house on a freezing February night 2 years ago. But the catch had lasted 2 years and would continue indefinitely. The choice to hold on, to build trust, to construct family from fragments, and the stubborn insistence that healing was possible. Theron thought about the man he'd been before that night. Powerful, isolated, convinced that safety required emotional distance. That man had been surviving but not living. The man he was now, Papa Theron, bookstore co-owner, someone who read bedtime stories and attended kindergarten performances, was more vulnerable but infinitely richer. He'd traded control for messy, complicated love, and he'd discovered that the latter was worth every risk. "Thank you," he said quietly into the darkness, "for trusting me when you had no reason, for giving me the chance to be better than my past, for showing me that redemption is possible if you're brave enough to reach for it." Sable kissed him softly. "Thank you for catching me, for catching us both, for proving that sometimes the most dangerous people are the safest to fall toward, because they remember what it means to need saving." Outside, the city continued its eternal cycle: violence and kindness, despair and hope, people falling and people catching. But inside this space they'd created together, 3 souls had found harbor against every storm. And that was everything that mattered. Sometimes courage looks like collapsing into a stranger's arms and trusting they'll catch you. Sometimes redemption looks like using power to protect instead of destroy. Sometimes family looks like three survivors choosing to heal together. The bravest thing we can do is ask for help when we need it, even from unexpected sources. And the most powerful thing we can do is choose to catch those who fall, to stand between the vulnerable and the darkness. If this story moved you, support organizations fighting trafficking, become foster parents, volunteer with trauma recovery programs. Your courage might be exactly what someone needs to survive. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. Remember, we're all stronger when we catch each other.